was a senior in high school, I took a class called Physical Exploration. It was one of those easy classes where we played games like tennis, basketball, and even golf. It wasn't particularly challenging, but it was fun, and it got me out of some more difficult subjects. One day, we had a field trip planned to go canoeing and fishing at a nearby lake. I wasn't much into fishing, and I didn't enjoy swimming all that much, but I figured it would be a good way to get out of 2 other classes for a few hours, so I was all for it. The drive there was about 45 minutes, and once we arrived, we were given the choice to either go fishing or try canoeing. The lake was big and surrounded by thick woods, with a park area and a dock that stretched out into the water. I ended up fishing with my friend Jake, though neither of us was particularly interested in it. It seemed like a good enough way to pass the time, and we weren't in any rush. I didn't have much of a desire to canoe, so when Jake suggested we explore the woods instead, I was up for it. We weren't exactly supposed to leave the designated areas, but we were high school seniors, and we knew when we could bend the rules a little. After a little while of fishing, we decided to take a walk along one of the paths in the woods. We didn't think it would hurt to get a little fresh air, and we had no plans of straying too far from the group. We walked for about 15 minutes, chatting about school, sports, and some of the other random things that high school students talk about. After a while, Jake mentioned that he had to pee, so he stepped off the path and into the woods. I stood there for a minute just looking around when Jake came back and said he'd noticed something strange. Apparently, he saw a bright green color coming through the trees, which struck us as odd. The woods were pretty dense, so we couldn't see much at first, but we figured it might be worth checking out. We weren't sure what to expect, but we were both curious. We made our way toward the green color, and as we got closer, we realized it was a tent. There were also blankets scattered around, some of them tossed carelessly to the side. We cautiously approached the tent and peeked inside. To our surprise, the inside was far from what we expected. There were more blankets, food, and even cleaning supplies. It looked like someone had set up camp there, living in the woods. That's when we noticed something even stranger. There were bottles of alcohol and various drugs stashed under the blankets in the corner of the tent. Jake and I exchanged a glance. We weren't sure if we should report it or leave it alone. But before we could make a decision, we heard a noise. Something, or someone, was moving through the woods in the direction of the tent. We froze, and then we heard it again, closer this time. Without thinking, we turned and ran deeper into the woods, trying to put some distance between us and whatever was coming. We didn't want to get caught. A few seconds later, we saw a man emerge from the trees. He was tall, thin, and covered in dirt. He looked like he hadn't bathed in weeks. The second he spotted the open tent, he shouted a curse word and started looking around. Jake was already running, and I followed him. We ran as fast as we could, pushing through the trees and underbrush. We finally reached the edge of the lake and decided to follow its shore, hoping that the water would lead us to safety. We ran along the edge for several minutes, but when we looked back, we couldn't see the man anymore. We thought we had lost him, but we weren't sure. The problem was, we were lost ourselves. We didn't know which way to go. We tried walking quietly, hoping to find the path or figure out how to get back. The woods felt endless, and after what seemed like hours, we finally stumbled upon the man again. He spotted us immediately, and once again he began chasing us. This time, Jake and I split up. He went one way, and I ran the other. The man chose to chase me. I could hear his footsteps behind me, and when I glanced back, I saw him holding a stick, ready to strike. I knew I was faster than him, but the woods were thick, and I wasn't familiar with the terrain. I could barely see where I was going. After what felt like forever, I managed to get far enough ahead of him. I turned a corner and saw the man trip over a fallen log, which slowed him down. I didn't stop to see if he was okay. I just kept running. Eventually, I managed to find the path again. My heart was racing, but I was relieved to be back on track. I quickly texted Jake, and after a little while, he showed up. We made our way back to the dock, just in time to join the rest of the group. We had about 20 minutes to spare before the field trip ended, but neither of us was in any hurry to tell anyone about what had happened. When I was in 4th grade, my class went on a field trip to an old historic mansion. I can't quite remember why we were there, but I think it was to learn about the history of the building. It was located on the outskirts of town and had been standing for almost 180 years. We arrived and were greeted by a guide who started giving us a tour of the place. Now, when I say this place was a mansion, I mean it. It had 2 large floors, a basement, and even an attic. Inside, there were at least 12 bedrooms, 6 bathrooms, and many other rooms, like a library, several living rooms, and even a couple of studies. The mansion was massive, and it felt like there was a new corner to explore every time you turned around. There were about 18 of us in the class, and after the guided tour, we were allowed to roam around the main floor. The teachers weren't keeping a close eye on us, so I saw an opportunity. I had always been fascinated by history, and the house itself intrigued me. I really wanted to see what the upper floors looked like. The stairs were right in front of me, and since no one was paying attention, I decided to sneak upstairs. When I reached the top, I immediately noticed the musty smell that old buildings have. It was the kind of scent that made the whole place feel ancient, like it had 1,000 stories to tell. I began exploring the bedrooms one by one. Each room was more interesting than the last, with old furniture, faded wallpaper, and creaky floors. It was like stepping back in time. I was having so much fun exploring that I didn't realize how far I'd wandered. Eventually, I found myself at the end of the hallway, in front of a room that looked like it hadn't been touched in years. Curious, I walked inside. The room was quiet, almost too quiet. I walked over to the window to get a better look at the view, but as I reached for the curtains, I heard a noise. It sounded like something was moving in the closet. I stopped, confused. The closet was old and had a wooden door that looked like it hadn't been opened in ages. It was odd to hear something coming from it. I hesitated for a moment, but then my curiosity got the best of me. I stepped closer and reached for the door. As soon as I touched the handle, I felt a chill run down my spine. Something about that moment felt off, and I started to feel uncomfortable. I quickly decided against opening it and turned to leave the room. But just as I was walking out of the hallway, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned around and my heart nearly stopped. Standing in the doorway of the room was a man. He was tall, wearing a black shirt and gray pants, just standing there with a creepy smile on his face. His eyes locked onto mine, and I felt an overwhelming sense of dread. I couldn't explain why, but I just knew something was wrong. I didn't wait around to find out who he was or what he wanted. I turned on my heels and sprinted down the hallway as fast as I could. I rushed down the stairs, barely looking where I was going, and finally made it back to the main floor where the group was gathered. I didn't tell anyone what had happened. I wasn't sure who that man was, but I didn't want to find out. It was a field trip I would never forget, and I still get the chills thinking about it. When I was a freshman at State University, I took a geology class. As part of the course, we went on a field trip for extra credit. Since I wasn't the best at science, I thought it would be a good idea to attend. The field trip was to a park known for its diverse rock formations. It had a long history and was home to many ancient geological features. The professor handed us a checklist and a worksheet, giving us a brief introduction before sending us out to complete the assignment. There were about 20 students in the class, and the park was huge. It had vast open spaces, wooded areas, and rocky trails. We were told to spread out and explore. I teamed up with my friend Alex, and we decided to venture far into the park. Alex climbed a small hill, while I worked on the worksheet, filling it out as we went. We made quick progress, as it was a pretty simple assignment, and we were having a good time. After finishing the worksheet, we took a short break and decided to explore the park further. We wandered down a trail for a few minutes, admiring the scenery. The trees were tall, the rocks were massive, and the air felt fresh. Suddenly, we noticed a man walking down the trail toward us. He was middle-aged, wearing a worn-out jacket and looked a little out of breath. When he reached us, he told us that his friend had passed out nearby and needed help. He claimed that his phone had died and he was unable to call for help. He asked us to follow him quickly, so we agreed, thinking it was an emergency. The man started jogging, and we followed him, picking up the pace. After 2 or 3 minutes, we reached a small wooded area where the man stopped abruptly. He said his friend was behind a tree. We looked around, but there was no sign of anyone. Just as I was about to question him, several more men suddenly emerged from behind the trees. They came from all directions, surrounding us. The men were all large and intimidating, and one of them was holding a wooden stick. The original man who had spoken to us turned and told us to hand over our wallets and phones. Alex immediately refused, saying he wasn't giving up his belongings. The moment he said no, one of the men rushed forward, grabbed Alex and shoved him to the ground. I froze for a moment, unsure of what to do. Then I tried to stay calm and spoke up, telling them to relax. But instead of backing off, the men started yelling at us, tightening the circle around us. Feeling trapped, I realized I had no choice but to comply. I pulled out my wallet and phone, handing them over to one of the men. Alex reluctantly did the same. The men then told us to walk deeper into the woods. It was clear they were planning something, and I knew we had to escape. I whispered to Alex, telling him to run the moment he got the chance. The men were still surrounding us, so I had to act fast. I pretended to trip over a rock and fell to the ground, clutching my leg as if I had injured it. The men yelled at me to get up, but I kept insisting I couldn't. As they stepped closer to examine me, the attention shifted away from Alex. Without wasting a second, he turned and bolted into the woods. I took my chance and quickly got up, sprinting between 2 of the men. It was a close call, but I managed to slip away unnoticed. The men immediately started chasing us, but we didn't look back. We ran as fast as we could, the sound of their footsteps pounding behind us. It felt like they were getting closer, but we pushed ourselves harder. Finally, we reached the hill we had climbed earlier. We began shouting for help, hoping someone in the group would hear us. The men stopped chasing us, and we didn't waste any time. We sprinted back to the group, out of breath but relieved. However, they still had our phones and wallets. We immediately reported the incident to the authorities. They managed to track my phone to an abandoned house on the outskirts of town. 2 of the men were arrested, and we were able to get our belongings back. It was the most terrifying field trip experience of my life, and I still get chills thinking about it. I never imagined something like that could happen in such a peaceful place. The whole experience taught me to always trust my instincts and to be cautious, no matter where I am.